Iti, thus, sma, as in the past, Raja, the king, Adyavasaya, perseverance, yukta, being engaged, prachina, eastern, muleshu, with the root, kusheshu, on a seat made of kusa straw, dhira, self-controlled, udamukha, facing the northern side, dakshina, on the southern, kule, bank, aste, situated, samudra, the sea, patnya, wife of, swa, own, sutta, son, nyasta, given over, bhara, charge of administration. Translation: in perfect self-control, Maharaj Parikshit sat down on a seat of straw with straw roots facing the east, placed on the southern bank of the Ganges, and himself faced the north. Just previously had given charge of his kingdom over to his son. Purport: the river Ganges is celebrated as the wife of the sea. The seat of kusa straw is considered to be sanctified if the straw is taken out of the earth complete with root, and if the root is pointed towards the east, it is considered to be auspicious. Facing the north is still more favorable for attaining spiritual success. Maharaj Parikshit handed over the charge of the administration to his son before leaving home. He was thus fully equipped with all favorable conditions. Translation: in perfect self-control, Maharaj Parikshit sat down on a seat of straw with straw roots facing the east, placed on the southern bank of the Ganges. He himself faced the north. Just previously he had given charge of his kingdom over to his son. So this describes the position of Parikshit Maharaj, his sitting position, which we may find a little bit peculiar. Why they're going into so much details about describing the straw on which he sat and which direction the roots were facing, and whatever. But we see this is, actually you'll see if you look at other scriptures and Puranas, etc., you'll find similar descriptions about the kusa grass and the roots facing a certain direction and the person facing a certain direction to meditate. So there are some rules in various scriptures given on how to do various activities, and particularly when it comes to rituals and meditation and spiritual life. There are all sorts of rules given in the scripture for doing this, many of which are very detailed. So we find in the scriptures, for instance, that this kusa grass is often mentioned. It's very, very sacred in India, and it's considered to be the hairs of Varahadev. When he shook his hair, some of the hairs fell out, it became kusa grass, so it's considered to be very sacred. So in all of the huge sacrifices they do, they have this kusa grass at all times. And usually they make the asanas, or the seats, out of kusa grass. And for doing sacrifices and for doing deity worship, one of the rules is you have to have an asana, which means a seating place. So in order to carry out the worship properly, you have to have the proper seat. And one of the ideal seats is a seat made of kusa grass. So it has some property to it, which is therefore specified in the scripture. You have to get a kusa grass seat, etc., because it has some special quality to it. Of course, if we examine this scientifically, we may not find a proper reason for it. But and some of the things in scripture we can't even question. We don't know why they're like that, but nevertheless, it's a scriptural injunction. And some of it may be contrary to our normal point of view. And Prabhupada gives the example that the stool is impure, but the stool of the cow is considered sacred. And then we use that to purify things. So we take the cow dung and we smear it all over the floor. And in fact, they smear the cow dung on the sacrificial arena to make it pure. And even in the temple room, when they're going to install a deity, they'll smear cow dung everywhere to purify it, in spite of the fact that the dung is usually considered to be impure, but cow dung is considered to be very pure. So we may think this is real strange, it's a barbarian custom of some sort, simply because the cow is sacred, therefore the cow dung is sacred, whatever. But of course, if we analyze it, that you can do a little bit. You analyze the quality of the cow dung, and you'll see there's antiseptic properties there. So on one level, it is all fine to do it, and there's some reason for doing it. So in some cases, we can find some modern scientific reason for some of the activities that they are mentioned in the Vedic literature. So that's just one of them. But other ones are also there, and maybe we cannot find a good reason. So just what is the vibration or the influence of kusa grass is very difficult to detect. It's not a sanitary thing at all. It's got to do more with the how it affects your body and your mind, perhaps, and therefore it's more creates a better effect on your whole body. This is the type of seat made out of kusa grass like that. Furthermore, here the kusa grass has to be pointing in a certain direction. So the roots have to point east and the points in the opposite direction. So that also affects it. So even the direction is very, very important. So of course that is understood. Many things are prescribed according to direction. For instance, we say that you should sleep with your head towards the east or the south, not towards the north or the west. Why? It's difficult to say. But of course the immediate explanation is that you get more restful sleep. And now of course probably you can experiment and do this and see which direction you sleep in better or whatever like that. But I don't think anyone's done that. But anyway, this is just the recommendation given in Scripture. You face towards the east or the south rather than the north or the west. And probably if you do it, you'll find out it's good for your sleep, whatever like that. We can say, why is that? Why is that possible? Why is it possible? How is it possible that can affect your sleep? But then if we examine science, and we'll see that the directions are also important even in science, because the North Pole and the South Pole are there, and the magnetic fields are going in certain directions that way. So that's also got an effect on the body. So possibly it's got to do with the magnetic fields or something, and therefore that affects your brain, that affects your rest. So possible explanation for that. So anyway, here the direction is very important. So the roots have to face towards the east and the tips towards the west. And then you here Parikshit was facing north on the southern bank of the Ganga. And then Prabhupada mentions in the purport that facing the north is very, very favorable for spiritual success. So the directions themselves have some indication of, good results or bad results or whatever. So often north is associated with meditation and things like that. So therefore, face north. The other option, of course, is to face east, which is always considered auspicious. This was and of course, Maharaj Parikshit was facing the Ganga, and therefore, he pointed towards the north. So these are all the little details given here for Parikshit Maharaj, who was not just dying, but he was formalizing this almost like a ritual, and therefore he has the proper asana with the roots in the right direction, he's facing in the right direction, etc. So even though he's about to die, he's doing this in a very formal way. And one of the reasons for this also is that so he can concentrate his mind properly and not get bewildered, because dying is a time of bewilderment and fear. So we have to have a very peaceful mind in order to die in the most auspicious way. So it is natural that Parikshit would engage things so that everything was favorable for him when he passed out of his body. We have one rule in devotional service that we do what is favorable and we would reject what is unfavorable. This is actually the first two parts of out of the six elements of surrender. We accept what is favorable and we reject what is unfavorable. So what is favorable for the devotee is what is favorable for controlling the mind, withdrawing it from material enjoyment and ahankara, that is false ego and pride and all these negative things, and whatever is favorable for enabling us to concentrate on the Supreme Lord so we can develop spiritually. So anything that is favorable for that we encourage. So that is what Maharaj Parikshit is doing here. His ultimate goal is not just simply sit on an asana or follow some rule for rule's sake, but rather so that he can concentrate his mind on Krishna. So whatever is favorable for that, he will do. So that is a basic rule of devotional service. We have many different types of rules, but then ultimately Rupa Goswami says there's only two rules ultimately. Always think of Krishna and never forget him. So anything that encourages that we do, anything that distracts us we avoid. So therefore all of the other angas, hearing, chanting, remembering, deity worship, are for remembering Krishna. And other rules are for so we don't forget Krishna. So that is, of course, the don't do ones are some like we have regulative principles like no meat eating, etc., no intoxication, because those will help us forget Krishna. It'll push us into try to satisfy our material senses, so therefore unfavorable. So we avoid certain things. So ultimately the process is not so difficult, even though we may see many rules. Ultimately we accept what is favorable for remembering and cultivating devotion to Krishna, and we reject what is unfavorable. However, we may not know what is favorable or unfavorable unless we experiment for many years. We could try different things, different places, different foods, and whatever. So many things. And then after maybe 10 years we'll figure out, and even then we may not figure out. So that is why we have an easier process, and that is we look for the rules in Scripture. We follow those rules, then it makes it easier for us. And then if we follow the rules, then we can test it and see if it works. And if it works, fine. Then we follow those rules. However, Scripture has a lot of rules. In fact, we also say too many rules. So sometimes we criticize some of the people following the Vedas and we say they are smartas and they're following too many rules. So of course the smarta, the meaning of smarta is one who follows the Smriti Shastras. So there's nothing wrong with following the Smritis as such. But if we get too attached to following the rules without the proper goal, that it becomes a problem. And if we, in some cases, following all the rules may not be proper. In other words, we're qualified on certain levels for certain sets of rules. So if we're on an upper level, we should not follow the rules for the lower level. The person in the 12th standard does not follow the same rules of study as the person in the first grade. The person studying medicine does not follow the same schedule as the person studying law, etc. So everybody has a qualification and what is favorable for their particular type of work, activities, etc., and goal. So therefore we can't expect to have everyone follow all the rules. They follow certain rules according to qualification. So that is made clear in the Smritis themselves, and therefore they have different sets of rules for different types of people. So the Sudras follow one set of rules. That is not the same as the set of rules for the Brahmana who are at the top. So the Brahmanas have very strict rules to follow. The Sudras have very lax rules to follow because they can't follow all those rules. So the Sudras are in tamagun, mode of ignorance. They're attached to material enjoyment, don't have much spiritual interest. They want to support their bodies and their families more than anything else. So they get one set of rules to follow. The Brahmanas are supposed to have higher qualification of more detachment from the material world, more interest in spiritual life, acceptance of all the rules of Scripture. So they get a lot of rules to follow. So according to the different people in the world, then they follow different sets of rules. So not everybody's expected to follow all the rules. Again, huh? So when we come to bhakti, then again we come to a different level. So technically, bhakti is higher than the Brahminical level. The Brahman is in sattva gun, and the devotee is nirguna, beyond the gunas. So then logically we may say, okay, then we don't have to follow any rules because we're beyond the gunas. But no. If we are on the highest level, yes, no rules, that is prema or bhava. But if we're below that, then we're still got some impurities in us. So we have to follow some rules, some of the rules. Huh? So generally, the devotees follow these rules of the varnashram, which is the smriti rules, like the smartas, but we don't follow all of them. We follow those which are favorable for devotional service. Some of them we will reject as being unfavorable for bhakti. Huh? Others we will do, but we will do in such a way that they are made favorable for bhakti. Huh? So to that extent, the devotee follows varnashram. These are the smarta rules, or the varnashramic rules. So we cannot say we're beyond varnashram completely because we have a material body, we're living in the world, so we have to follow some rules. So then we follow the varnashramic rules as much as possible. At the same time, as I said, we do not follow all the rules because some will be contrary to bhakti. To that extent, then the devotee also follows varnashram to some degree. However, again, a little bit of a gray area is also there for the devotee. Which rules to follow? Do all devotees follow the same rules of varnashram, or less rules, or more rules, like that? And we'll have various degrees of this in various circumstances. Okay. And as one advances, one is less obliged to follow. So if one is in bhava and prema, no need at all. One is beyond the rules, etc. Therefore, there is a little bit of a gray area that how much to follow. It's according to the level of the person and his situation in life. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, particularly the grihastas, they are obligated to follow the varnashramic rules as much as possible, which isn't unfavorable for bhakti. So they follow as much as possible because they are living in the society, supporting their families, etc. So they follow the general rules of varnashram that others are also following. So that's one of the principles. Those who are renounced, then they're less obligated to follow those rules. So the ultimate test, of course, is what is favorable for bhakti. We follow those rules. What is unfavorable, we can neglect those rules. But then there's in between we have a set of rules which may not be favorable or unfavorable. So should we follow or not follow? So that the rule there is to teach the public. We'll follow the rules. So we may not be interested in them, and we don't need them, but we'll follow them to teach others. So that's the example we find with people like Arjuna, the Kshatriyas, the Pandavas. They follow the rules of Kshatriya Dharma. But they're beyond the Dharma. They are Nityasiddha devotees of the Lord. They don't need any Dharma at all. They're just devotees of Krishna. But they follow those rules of that society at that time. Why? To set an example for the other people who are following the rules, to inspire them to follow those rules of Dharma. So some devotees are in that level where they'll follow the rules even though they don't need to, and they're beyond the rules, but they'll do it to satisfy or say teach others. Which is also what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita: whatever the leader follows, others do. So therefore, you act like a kshatriya, and others will follow your example. Therefore, one is obliged not exactly for spiritual reasons, but simply to keep the varnashram system intact and let other people follow who are at a lower level. So in this way, we do what is favorable for devotional service. We can think of the varnashram as taking care of our material bodies, the rules for doing that. So you can have any set of rules. Different civilizations and different countries and different religions have different sets of rules for taking care of your body and whatever, and acting in society. So generally the devotees will choose the varnashramic rules to follow. We'll follow those which are favorable. So favorable means that they support our devotional activities. They help us. So in other words, by following those rules, we can maintain our health and a peaceful mental state so that we can practice bhakti nicely. That's all. That means it's favorable. So we borrow rules from the varnashram, like the rules of cleanliness, washing your hands, taking a bath, brushing your teeth, changing your clothes. These are all. Why do we follow those rules? If you look at people in other cultures, they don't follow those rules exactly. They have different rules for cleanliness and how much you have to take a bath and how much you have to change your clothes. It's all different. When they look at us, they say, "You're a little fanatical." Why are you taking so many baths? Why are you changing your clothes so much? Why are you doing this? So, why? Let's take it from the varnashram system. Of course, we'll find it's a little more strict. If you look in Hari Bhakti Vilasa, it's a little more strict than we're following, but still, we're following kind of after that pattern of what is there. So that's just on the gross physical level. We have certain rules we follow which are adapted from that varnashram system. And then we have the social rules. That is raising families, how the family members interact, how the members of the family interact with the rest of society, with the king, etc., or the government, etc. All these are also varnashramic rules, so social rules and family rules. So most of the devotees end up in family life, and most of the devotees are working in society, so they have to relate somehow to society and family. So bhakti itself doesn't have any separate rules for that. The only rules are here in chant and surrender to the Lord. So what do you do with your family? No rules there. So we take the rules from the varnashram system, which are favorable, and they're they correlate properly with bhakti, and we follow those rules again. So to that extent, we say we can follow the rules of varnashram as devotees. So that is the principle behind following bhakti and incorporating rules of varnashram in our life. So as I said, the grihastha more or less is obligated because he does have a family and he is working, so he has to use those rules as much as possible. And by doing so, then he can lead a peaceful life and at the same time perform devotional service to maximum. So therefore our principle is not simply to follow rules, but we follow those rules which are favorable to the bhakti. Then we have the other set of rules. These are the rules of bhakti. So these are rules we have to follow. They're not optional or favorable, unfavorable. They're all favorable. and if we don't do them, then nothing happens at all. So the rules of bhakti are the necessary rules. The other ones are favorable. We follow the favorable ones, we may reject the unfavorable ones. But all the rules of bhakti are favorable. They're helping our devotional development directly. The secondary rules, they don't actually produce bhakti, but secondarily they help because they help us with our mind and our body. The rules of bhakti are there to develop the soul's love of Krishna. So that's a different level, it's completely different. The rules are spiritual, not material rules. So that's the difference between the two sets of rules. So our main element, our main goal is to develop spiritually, so therefore we concentrate on the bhakti engagements, those rules, which help us develop love or prema for Krishna. So that's our main principle. So these rules we don't give up at all. These are the constant rules. which are always favorable. But only thing is, we have to avoid the upper odds, which make it unfavorable. So we avoid the upper odds, and we do the bhakti. So that's the principle behind following rules. So we necessarily follow the bhakti rules and avoid the upper odds. And then the other rules of society, we incorporate what is favorable for our spiritual advancement according to our ashrama and our age and position in society, etc. Therefore, the secondary rules may become less and less important the more that the devotion develops, because we're no longer dependent on our material body anymore as we develop further and further. So therefore the rules lose their importance later on. But at the beginning stages, we are attached to our body, so therefore we follow more rules. But the principle is exactly this, that it's always secondary to the main principles of devotional service. Okay, any question there?
Don't really have an obligation to follow the normal rules of society, but you also have avadutas who more or less come under the same definition. So how would we understand the difference between the two?
Between the avaduta and the?
Nityasiddha.
Oh, well, we could say the avaduta he may be a sadhaka who has reached a very high level of bhava or prema. In which case he is disinterested completely in the material world and doesn't actually is not aware of his material body at all. So he may break the rules of society in terms of cleanliness or conduct or whatever, because he's not even aware of what he's doing in the material world. So that type of person, he's not a nityasiddha or anything, but he's approaching the bhava and prema. So therefore he's the rules of society are no longer applicable, and they're an impediment for him.
So sometimes Lord Nityananda is put forward as an avadu.
Yeah.
On what basis is that title given?
Oh, because he acted very, very strangely. He was not a normal follower of Brahminical rules and things like that. He would run into the liquor house or something, whatever like that, to preach to people, when generally the Brahmin should not even go near a liquor house, would go into it and talk to the people there, like this. Or he would associate with these low people or even touch them or something like that. So that's considered to be unheard of. Even Lord Chaitanya, he would get criticized if he went to the house of a non-Brahmana to get food or something like that. So, but nevertheless, he broke the rule again, and he went to Subhuti Rai's house, who was considered an outcast because he was touched by a Muslim, sprinkled water by a Muslim, and he ate his food, which is like unheard of at that time. So the devotees tend to, not be so conscious of those rules as others. And Nityananda was even more wild in his application of things than Lord Chaitanya. Yeah, I think if you look in Chaitanya Bhagavatam, you'll see some of his rather abnormal activities. He would play with the crocodiles in the river. He would run around naked like a little child sometimes, like this. Was Vamsidas Babaji he would offer raw eggplants to his deity and bathe them, just throw them in the Ganga like this and bathe them and take them out like this. But so we could criticize from the point of view of Archana, but we can't because he was on a different level.
You mentioned that sometimes following Santana rules would be detrimental to our devotional service.
Well, yeah, we have many rules of Varna Ashram, worship of devatas, worship of pitras, etc. So generally we avoid that. However, in I think it's Kriya Sardipika, there Gopal Bhatta alters those ceremonies where you worship the pitras. He substitutes devotees instead, or devotional mantras instead. Or we can regard the devatas as servants of the Lord, and then offer them the prasadam of Krishna or Vishnu. And then that will absolve us of any, aparad, like thinking of the devatas as equal to the Supreme Lord, etc. So we may avoid the worship, or we make it more compatible to devotional service by understanding that the Devatas are servants of the Lord, and therefore we're only worshiping as servants, not as supreme or separate independent entities. Another, of course, is that especially as one advances, the different rituals may be, because they're a little more indirect, they could say they are related to worship of the Lord, but they may be a little bit indirect, like Sandhya Vandana, doing the rituals every day for the Gayatri Mantra, which may take half hour to an hour 3 times a day. So, and it's Gayatri, and Gayatri is ultimately worship of Vishnu, but you chant Vedic mantras as an introduction to all that, so it takes a long time. So if you're more advanced, you may just think, oh, wow, I can just chant Hare Krishna, do kirtan instead of doing all these other things, spend my time doing this because I don't have so much other time, so why can't I just chant instead of following these rules? So at a certain point, you may give up those rules. You may take them as like dependence on the rituals takes up a lot of time, and therefore I'd rather just directly worship the Lord and do kirtan. So therefore you may find it unfavorable at that stage and reject those rituals. Okay, anything else? Okay, Hare Krishna.